and thank you for joining us for Coffee and Conversation with Alumni. My name is Diana Guzman Lugo. I am the Career Services Coordinator and the current third year here at Candler School of Theology, and I would like to hand it over to our two guests to please introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Reverend Kanisha Billingsley. I'm a two-time graduate of Candler in '09 with the MDiv in 2013 with the THM. Currently, I am the Director of Spiritual Health and Education in Tampa, Florida for Tampa General Hospital. And I'm glad to be here.
Hey there, I'm Reverend Rob Schoonover. I'm the Associate Pastor for youth and younger adults at Eastminster Presbyterian Church in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm a 2021 graduate, MDiv graduate of Candler, and I'm so excited to be here and talk about how I ended up where I did and the wild path that was. So thanks.
So just to give an idea to our students of what kind of things you guys see on a daily basis, can you guys describe what a typical workday looks for you guys?
Oh gosh, chaos for me. So um, Tampa General Hospital is the only regional one academic trauma one hospital in the region in Florida where we're located. And we are also a vast system. If you think of Emory University and Emory Hospital, we are the same kind of entity with USF being our academic arm and Tampa General Hospital being a massive enterprise of ambulatory sites, hospitals, etc. So a day in the life of the spiritual health director in a trauma one center is very diverse. We see the highest acuities of patients, and even now, though my primary function is not direct clinical care, I am responsible for the clinical workflows, the policies, the procedures, the people, in helping to manage and resource the needs of both team members and patients. So my day is often filled with meetings, pivoting, responses, and even advocacy for team members, patients, and families. It's a full day, a beautiful day, and also an exhausting day as a director of spiritual health in a trauma one center.
I have very different days every day of the week. I try to structure them as best I can, but our church is a about 2,000 member congregation and large pastoral staff, large staff in general. So Mondays are typically filled with meetings to kind of set the agenda for the week, and then Tuesday is my hospital day, and we almost always have members in the hospital, and so I go and sit with them and pray with them, whether that's someone who's just given birth to a child or someone who's just had surgery or someone who may be near the end of their life. And so Tuesdays are very intense days for me. That goes right into Wednesday, which we have a lot of programming on Wednesday evening for the whole congregation. And so I'm a part of that. And then Thursday, I'm trying to catch up on whatever I can do. And then Friday is supposed to be my off day, but oftentimes things come up or there's sporting events where some of my students are competing, or maybe I go down to the university and have coffee with some of our college friends. So it varies week to week, but that's a brief outline of my structure. I'm also chasing my 2-year-old son, Harris, who goes to preschool at our church. And inevitably a toddler gets sick or something like that happens. And so balancing the personal life and the work life in the middle of all that.
Well, I think one question I have for both of you guys, it sounds like your roles call for a lot of versatility, because different things are asked for you guys at different moments. So what are some of the things that you think, or one of the ways Candler helped you prepare for that kind of being able to shift and be multiple things for multiple people?
I have kind of, there's two thoughts that come to my mind. First, as a MDiv student, my first year, my Con Ed 1 site was in the hospital. Reverend Billingsley knows this work really well, as she just stated, and nothing prepares you for um, the a chaotic work environment like the hospital, where every day you don't know what you're walking into or what the day is going to look like. And so that probably prepared me better than anything. I would also say um, the courses themselves. I mean, there are days where you're walking in. There was a semester where I would take a pastoral care course um, with with Dr. Larte, and then pivot to a New Testament Greek class. And so, what your brain has to do to pivot between those two environments can really prepare you for a variety of different settings that you end up, whether that's the parish or somewhere else where you're having to wear a lot of different hats and think a lot of different things. Because there may be a day where I'm coming in from the hospital, and then I'm leading a Bible study with high school students, and they have very deep questions, and I'm kind of done both of those things within 2 hours of each other. So um, I think the act of showing up in that space um, and digesting all that's been given to you is good preparation in and of itself.
I agree with you. Definitely the Con Ed. My level one Con Ed experience was actually in a women's prison. That prison has since closed down, but being in that prison environment, which was completely different from any life experience that I was familiar with, adjacent or otherwise, really helped to build a sense of sensitivity, not only to context, but also to people, and an awareness of grace and internal self management that was then reinforced when I did clinical pastoral education, or CPE. And I agree on the benefits of serving ministry in a healthcare setting and or prison setting. It does prepare you, as Reverend Rob stated, for the versatility required in the real world. And another form of preparation that I don't even think we consciously process, because coming into Candler, that means you've already been through undergraduate, right? But the ability to sit in the room with people and listen to various perspectives and to learn how to navigate intellectual difference, theological difference, ideological difference, while remaining aligned and attuned to one's own sound of the genuine. Howard Thurman in that class with Dr. Luther Smith was transformative for me, and I know we'll get there later. But that is a skill set, right? Emotional intelligence and interpersonal intelligence and communication skills are all developed within the experience of theological education. And those soft skills, which now in the world of AI and other things are actually quite hard skills if you think about it, but those skills will set you apart in any field. Those are the transferable skills that are in demand now. So I would say use the opportunity to sharpen your ability to sit in tension, to sit in nuance, to prioritize curiosity over convincing someone to share the same perspective as you share. Invaluable.
Reverend Kanisha, by any way, are you talking about Lee Arrendale State Prison? That's where I did my Con Ed one. I think I was the second to last cohort before it no
Mm-hmm.
longer became a Con Ed site.
Yes.
But I would like to hear more, Reverend Kanisha, if you could, about how it is that you got to. Did you know right away after Arrendale, after your CP, that you wanted to go into hospital chaplaincy?
Absolutely not. And I'm smiling big because I see one of my friends from my time there at Candler, Quentin Samuels, has joined the line, and he can attest to the fact that everybody knew. All right, Kanisha her focus was ministry, and I was going to be a successful Baptist preacher in a in a mega church environment, pulpit every Sunday, all of those things, right? That was my destiny, my course, my work. And I've done that level of work. And for me, CPE, spiritual health in an institutional setting, happened based on a bait and switch. Short story, very powerful. I went to visit one of my colleagues during my THM journey. She was doing completing her internship as required by the UMC at the time, completing her internship at Grady Memorial Hospital. She invited me to lunch. I went to lunch with her. She was holding the emergency department trauma pager. The pager goes off and she says, "Kanisha, come in and meet my manager. I have to respond to this trauma. I'll be back." I sit down, her manager is a CPE educator, and we just start talking. And that 10-minute conversation really shifted me in terms of ministry and focus. He said one line, right, as I had navigated being the first woman in ministry in my Baptist congregation and all of the trauma drama that goes and beauty that goes along with that. He said to me, "Kanisha, sometimes you have to bless the fact that you left." Shifted my perspective, shifted the grief that I was experiencing. And I said to him, "I don't know what you selling around here to these people in terms of spiritual formation and self-actualization, but sign me up." And so in that moment, I signed up to do a CPE internship at Grady. And then I took time after that. I did church planting, megachurch ministry work, all of these other things. Sensed a call to go back for my residency in 2018, which I did at Emory, still thinking, oh, hospital is not for me, not for me, not for me. And then I end up here. So for me, it was definitely a call that I surrendered to with much resistance. It was not the blueprint that I had for myself.
I will ask you more about that. But for now, Reverend Rob, can you talk about what your path was? Did you come into Candler knowing that you wanted to go into ministry, knowing that you wanted to go into remaining within the Presbyterian denomination?
No. I was came to Candler really with lack of any sort of direction with my vocational path. My undergraduate degree was in human services, but that really looked like nonprofit management and fundraising. And I kind of came to seminary because I knew later in life I would regret not answering a lot of the questions I had theologically, and this was the time to do it. And my theology and my way of thinking needed to be examined and needed to be challenged, and in some sense needed change. And Candler gave me all of those things. I'm very grateful. I actually didn't. I kind of identified as a free agent in terms of denominational affiliation going in, but I was raised in the Presbyterian Church and sort of quickly discerned that maybe that actually is where I belong and where I need to go. And so did my kind of 2 internship at a small PCUSA church down the road from Candler, and they nursed me back to health, to love ministry and to love the church. And that kind of 2 internship turned into a part-time job my 3rd year of seminary when we weren't required to have any kind of con ed placement. And while I was navigating the ordination process, I needed a job after graduating from Candler. I wasn't quite finished up with the PCUSA ordination process. And so actually a member of that church worked at Columbia Seminary in their advancement office and needed some help with needed a development person, needed someone to come in and kind of run their annual giving operation. And this was right still in the pandemic. And so I said yes. And I was there for 4 great years, kind of pairing my theological education with my nonprofit background, and had a great time doing that. And those skills and that experience actually is what got me my job here at Eastminster in Columbia, where I've been since May. So every step of my journey led to the next thing. And we can talk about that more later, but that is what Candler gave me practically that I'm so grateful for, and talk about all the time to people that are interested in listening.
Either one of you could answer this question, but it sounds like both of you guys faced a bit of uncertainty when it came to what came after Candler. So how did you navigate that? Because I think that's something I see very often within my friends. I'm a third year, and there's some of us who are still like, we're not quite sure what may come next. And I also remember first year and seeing some of my friends wrestle with their denomination or wrestling with maybe ministry's not what I want and being surprised with the way their time at Candler pulled them different routes from what they had said.
I want to, in transparency, name my initial response when I graduated with an MDiv in 2009, and name now my current response to uncertainty. So, of course, for context, when I graduated with my MDiv in 2009, we were in the middle of a recession. And a lot of our colleagues at that time, we were coming out with this graduate degree, this call experience, this blueprint. Some of us had the privilege of connectional denomination. Others of us had the privilege of gender, race, whatever on our side, and others of us, like myself, had neither of those privileges, and we were all scrambling, trying to find now how will I care for myself, right? And my initial response to that uncertainty coming out of school in 2009 honestly was depression and anxiety. Those were very, very tough years because I was wrestling with, okay, God, I went here based on your instruction to me, believing and trusting that when I came out of here, the pathway for me would be, laid out, right? The preferred response to obedience is always a clear next step that leads to a place of abundance and whatever that looks like for the individual, not a desert season or a place of lack or scarcity, right? But we know in actuality, all of those things can be true simultaneously. And so my initial response was definitely depression, anxiety, frustration. But now, having journeyed with God and having embraced a more expansive view of who I am as a human being in relation to God and the divine in all forms, I embrace uncertainty as an opportunity to play, to explore, to be different, to experience joy and learn more of my capacity in different ways. The anxiety is not as loud now because I don't need certainty. What I need is availability and willingness to do a new thing and to be a new thing. And to trust my enoughness, to trust my skills, to trust the commitment of the universe to my holistic well-being. And that's a significant paradigm shift for me as I navigate as a spiritual leader.
Yeah, I definitely went through my share of worrying and fear and trembling about what my next step would be. I remember it was June or July after I graduated, and my next step had not quite lined up yet. And it was, my wife is a school counselor, and we were like, what's going to happen next? I was looking at substitute teaching and doing all of these things that um, would have helped us live, but was not in line with what my call or what my MDiv had prepared me to do. And um, I was fortunate to have been in a situation where the network I was in and sort of the community that was around me was able to help me. But now that there's some distance from it, I look back and think, this degree and this path really does prepare us for uncertainty a lot better than maybe other paths do. At Candler, we're taught to ask questions and to live in uncertainty. And that doesn't mean there won't be fear and anxiety that comes, but we know how to ask questions, and we know how to live in tension and how to live in community. And the interesting thing is, a lot of places outside the church maybe inside the church, but certainly outside the church, are looking for that. They are looking for people who know how to ask hard questions and live in tension. These soft skills that we're talking about are only going to be more needed as we move more online and we rely more on um, all these fancy things to do the work for us. We need people who know how to communicate and know how to live in tension, know how to ask hard questions, know um, how to take the temperature of a culture in a place. And so, um, I would I would encourage you, if you're someone who's listening to this and kind of struggling with it, you have skills that you don't know you have, and you have strength that you don't know you have um, for your next step. That may not make you feel great um, in the short term, but I think in the long term you'll learn that.
And may I add, while you were sharing, Reverend Ron, a classroom experience came up for me. It was the Images of Christ class taught by Dr. Tangaraj, who has since returned to India, but he would still come back to visit campus from time to time. And he was teaching us an Indian song. And he went to do the beat and he gave the room the note. And immediately, all of us harmonized. He stopped us and he said, "You are conditioned to create harmony. Release that, because life is not harmonious. You have to learn to live in discord. You have to learn to live in situations that you cannot harmonize. You cannot make sense of it. You cannot make it sound good or be good. But if you allow the course to take place, if you just stay on the note and on the beat, you will hear it. You will experience it." And so we followed his instruction for the song that he was teaching us, and it was absolutely beautiful. Different from what our ears were attuned to and expected based on our Western US experience, but nonetheless spiritual and sacred and what we needed at that time. So I think learning to live without harmony, learning to live without perfection, learning to live without expecting harmonious conditions beyond the self, right? Center yourself, remain in alignment and in great community with all of yourselves, okay? CPE. But in terms of life, life is gonna life, baby. And your ability to see reality and to remain grounded and hopeful within yourself is a true power.
I think what you both just said is truly very powerful. And I think I and many Candler students needed to hear that, especially I think we sit in uncertainty and our first instinct is to go towards comfort. But sometimes it's okay to sit there. And I think sometimes that's exactly where God intended us to be. But Reverend Kanisha, you got ahead of me. I was actually going to ask you guys both. You both mentioned how Candler challenged you to ask questions, challenged you to sit with and wrestle with things. So, what are the experiences within Candler that you feel like really helped shape that for you, whether that be classroom or other types of clubs or activities that happened around campus?
Thinking about two kind of separate things. Some of my best friends, like I have a group of friends that I made at Candler that are still like my people. I kind of talk about what some people might have had as an undergraduate experience. I sort of had at Candler, where you're maybe the community you get in undergrad is really the people that you stick with through it all. You go to each other's weddings. Um, you go to family vacation. Now we have kids and we go on family vacations and all these things. Well, that community for me was at Candler, and the people I met at Candler, um, who are kind of all around the country now and all across the vocational spectrum, the theological spectrum, the denominational spectrum, and that kind of outside the classroom, those conversations to process things, I had a Saturday morning kind of breakfast with two other guys that helped us process all that we were learning theologically, and that did volumes for me. I mean, my spiritual and mental health um, was so encouraged and edified by them. The second thing was there's an experience from my New Testament class. It was the Survey New Testament 501. Dr. Steve Krafchuk. It was the last class he was teaching, or the last survey class he was teaching, and he said something. He said that um, a scalpel in the hands of a novice is a weapon. It's deadly, but a scalpel in the hands of someone who's skilled and trained is therapy. And he was using that to talk about how we interpret scripture and how we preach it and teach it and talk about it, and the careful work that needs to come with our proclaiming of scripture and our living out of scripture in the world around us. And I think we all are seeing what happens um, when loose understandings of our text are applied all around us, and misunderstandings and misrepresentations and all of those things. And so um, that quote and that lesson went with me everywhere, and it still goes with me when I'm in the pulpit. That I have a responsibility to preach this word carefully, and with compassion and conviction. And so those are kind of two things that really shape, I think, my journey.
Yes, thank you, Ron, and I agree with that. Can't say enough about the community you build while you are in the trenches at Kindler, and how essential that is, not just for your time at Kindler, but beyond. And similar and the same as Reverend Ron, still having those close knit relationships that have now gone with me through various iterations of identity formation and life makeup, right? And those folks still being consistent partners in my holistic well being. And, I think about one of the challenges too, in terms of being a African American woman student at Candler in a predominantly non-African American context. I can remember um, back then in 2009 where the theology school was, the kinds of conversations that were being had, the kinds of experiences, similar and different for students based upon certain social factors, and the work we did as a collective to build bridges to more equitable futures, and the sense of that burden being shared, right? Not just students working, but also professors and administration working together. And for me, that was different from my context in a private, predominantly non-African American university, where I was leading the charge and having to wrestle with administration in a particular way. So I think Candler helped me to be a part of social justice and social change within the system and beyond, without feeling as though I had to absorb and navigate it as one of few, right? I think so many of us came in with a certain commitment to change and making systems better than what we found them, that I didn't have to have my cape on every day. I could sit in conversations, look across the room, and everybody knew, oh, Kanisha ain't gonna tap in for this one. Somebody else gotta navigate it. So I think even in terms of learning how to be a change agent and be well, how to be boundaried, even when it comes to social change in this conversation, I think is very important for our current context. But learning how to do that and still be well was a benefit of my Candler experience.
Well, Anisha, it sounds like a lot of that sharing was your
Mm-hmm.
community, and sharing of the burden is an important part of how one keeps going without getting burnt out. Can you talk about more about what are things Candler students can do keep that hope? Because this is something I've noticed a lot, especially the Taylor students who come ready to fight, wanting to fight for their communities. Um, Eventually, it just feels like the fight never stops.
Oh, that's a great question. And it's prioritizing myself is still something I'm growing into, still something I'm learning. And now, as a spiritual health leader for an enterprise, it's non negotiable because I cannot lead people well if I'm not well. So, the first thing I say to everybody, get you a therapist. And in getting a therapist, look at the process as you would getting a barber or a stylist, a hairdresser. You show up to the consultation, you share your truth, you listen, you see, you catch the vibe, just like you do when you go to get your hair done. If it doesn't sync up for you with that person, try someone else. And you keep trying until you find the right mix of whatever you need. And then you start a rhythm and a flow for the current season that you're in. In some seasons, you may very well need to be in therapy 2 times a week. In other seasons, you may be weekly or bi-weekly or monthly or as needed. But starting therapy is so transformative to have a space where someone is obligated to the highest moral, ethical code of confidentiality and best practices. And their commitment is to you seeing yourself and you healing yourself and you knowing yourself and you freeing yourself from everything that existed prior to your moment with them and preparing you for a brighter future. So make therapy a non-negotiable, make community and social engagement a non-negotiable for you, fun, make taking breaks a non-negotiable for you, and be okay with not having the capacity to show up. One of the most challenging seasons for me when Black Lives Matter was going into that kind of phase to getting to the height and the movement was happening. And I could not march as consistently as I would have liked because of some personal, physical challenges. And I knew I could not be out in the streets as I had been in previous years marching for change. And I really had to reorient myself to see, okay, what can I do as I prioritize my own holistic well-being? I can provide spiritual support and resources for the people who are doing the marching. So understanding each season of your life creates a different kind of capacity, and that is okay. You won't always be on the front lines. You won't always be the person marching, but you can always be available to lead change as you prioritize yourself and your well-being.
That's beautiful. I think many Candler students sometimes just need to, myself included, hear that it's okay to sit this one out. It doesn't mean you've given up the fight.
Yeah.
Reverend Rob, I was curious, you're a recent grad, I would say,
Mhm.
but have you seen any shift in the landscape for the church within the last 5 years? I think especially you would have got the tail end of COVID.
Yeah, in my role at Columbia, where I was often putting our alumni, getting our graduates and our alumni in conversation with churches that were looking for pastors. I learned a lot about what the expectations of congregations are and what they're looking for. That people say that there's a leadership crisis in the church, that there's kind of across denominations, no matter where you belong, there's churches looking for young, dynamic leaders, though sometimes they may say that, but they may not mean that, if I'm being candid. So doing your own research into the place where you may end up next and asking hard questions before you get into a pastoral relationship with them is really important. But they say this leadership crisis in the church thing is a big buzzword, but I think there's kind of a leadership crisis everywhere. So whether that's in local businesses or um, in the healthcare setting or certainly in political leadership, wherever you end up next, your voice is needed, and you might have to advocate and speak up more than you think, because oftentimes people are saying, yeah, we want young dynamic leaders, but they're really not ready for what they have to say. That's a very real thing. But another thing that I think in the last 5 years that I've seen um, the church change, or something that I didn't expect to see is probably the better way to put it. The rules for church involvement, and really the rules of church in general, are changing and have changed, and we don't really know what they are yet. Post-COVID, how people return, what people are wanting from their church and wanting from congregations and wanting from leadership has changed. I still don't think we totally know what that is, and we are trying to figure it out. In our setting in Columbia, a lot of people have returned. We're at a point where we're bigger than we were before the pandemic, which is not a universal case. That's not everybody, but we're having to ask, like, okay, what is our next? What does our space need to look like? How does our space need to reflect what people are looking for? And what I would say is that the kind of questions that you're asking in your classes at Candler right now are preparing you to ask those questions in your next setting. And there needs to be people need to be ready to receive those, and you need to be in a place where people can receive your questions in the right way, is what I would say. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. We actually have a question from someone in the audience. It says both panelists agree that a hospital or prison context is helpful to prepare for spiritual care training and experience. I have a goal to create a field of chaplaincy for actors. Do you think the hospital/prison environment is transferable to an art-based context? Why or why not?
I absolutely do. Because when we think about, as a fellow creative, when we think about what informs the art that we provide, it is our access to real world experiences and people in real context experiencing life. And life gets no realer than, I know that's not a word, but it doesn't get more real than a prison and hospital setting. Seeing humankind navigate crisis, limitation, dysfunction, miracles, disappointments, grief, celebration, life, and death. Who one becomes in the midst of that, navigating experience with someone. It's not your experience, but yet it impacts you, because within you are subconsciously aware of how similar episodes and situations have happened in your own life. That level of training and becoming, unmatched, completely unmatched. And it will help to shape not just the art, but the artist, not just the craft, but the creative life force energy that one is able to pull from as reference. I think theological education, we can say, is hands down the one experience where the skills and education you receive, great. But who you become if you fully engage the process, dividends can't even be measured, because that becoming and that ability to change and pivot, as we said before, can't be taught exclusively. It has to be experienced. So the experiential nature of what we do makes one great at everything else. I hope that made sense.
I don't have much to add there. That's a pretty perfect summation of why it's important. I would also just, if I did add anything, I would say folks in the creatives experience trauma, and folks in the hospital and in prison settings are experiencing trauma, and how to navigate that and how to be present with people that are hurting and suffering is more than just a transferable skill, because I think that minimizes the what's happening in those spaces. But it forms you in a way that I don't think anything else can form you. I don't know another way to say it. we just had Ash Wednesday, and I remember Ash Wednesday in the hospital setting I was in, and what a powerful experience that was for me. What that day in the hospital meant to patients, families, staff, other chaplains. That experience, I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget that experience. And so, yes.
I love how you guys have put a lot of emphasis to theological education to who we become and not just the skills we develop. I think some of the things from people who are hesitant to enter into theological education, a lot of the times don't quite see how these skills are transferable, but also how deeply impactful it is for someone. So for anyone who is thinking about maybe going to seminary and starting their theological education journey, what is some advice that you may have for them, or what would you say to give them that final push?
I would definitely say in the current even economic climate, having a realistic expectation for yourself and how much of your time and energy you are able to invest in the journey is important. During my time at Candler, I had colleagues who were full time, and then I had colleagues who were part time and working full time to offset costs, to not take on a lot of student loans. They were pacing themselves in accordance to the financial demands of their family. And I want to lift that because there were also some of us colleagues who felt the pressure of this is what God is calling me to, and I have to be all in. I got to leave my job. I got to pursue this education. And I just want to say that there is wisdom in pacing yourself and trusting and also researching to find the financial resources that you need to support yourself and your family. Because yes, the time is going to come and it's going to go, but doing it in a way that honors your needs is important and valuable too. And trust that nothing is wasted. In the journey, you'll have some classes and you might think, oh my gosh, I will never use this information if I'm not doing ministry, or if I'm doing ministry, my context would not respond to this. But trust that nothing is wasted, and that what is taking root in you and what you're learning has value. And like Reverend Rob said, even beyond the transactional nature, has value for yourself and those you will eventually serve.
I would say, uh, I growing up, I had some learning difficulties, and probably thought for a long time that, and probably didn't um, jump into seminary earlier because I didn't think I could do it. And some of the ways that we talk about our experience here and the rigor, and it is rigorous, it is intense, it is all of those things. Um, but if you're somebody who is thinking that like I don't have the intellectual capacity to do this, or I'm not, um, like the language I would have said is I'm not smart enough for seminary. You are, and you can, and the community here will help you in a way that um, that you wouldn't believe. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing is, yeah, having realistic expectations for what this degree can provide. We don't do this for a lot of income. Um, we don't do this to be the wealthiest people in our community, and that's okay. But knowing on the outset that answering this call for a lot of people is a sacrifice, and so specifically in income, and so understand that is something uh, that is realistic. I think my toddler is trying to break into my hideout here. So
Well, before we transition into the Q&A portion, is there any lasting words that you two want to share with the Candler community?
I just want to say congratulations for being on your journey, for being at this point in your journey, for getting to this moment. Congratulations. You are well on your way to your current and next best, whatever that looks like for you. This you're valuable, and so is this moment. So congratulations on continuing.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I had to run my little one off.
That's okay. I would just say that before we transition to the Q&A, any lasting words for like Candler community?
Oh, this is great. These were the best 3 years of my life, and just because they were the best doesn't mean they were the easiest. But um, this is such a beautiful place, and so much formation, and so many things happen here that you'll spend the rest of your life processing it. I mean, I could do the same conversation in 5 years and probably have different answers for what all of the things we've talked about have been because I'll still be formed. I'm still being formed by my experience at Candler.
I thank both Reverend Kanisha and Reverend Rob for joining us. They did an excellent job and they gave us so much valuable information. And also thank you to anyone who is watching and listening to us. For those of you here live with us, we're about to transition into a live Q&A, which will now be off camera. So I'm excited to see what questions you guys have.